Hey guys, this is Nathan and welcome to the Gaming 4. Today in this Unturned map review, we're going to be covering a map called Nortfelt. Now this isn't the first time we've actually reviewed this map. We reviewed this map during the first Unturned map review season. So of course if you guys are interested in seeing how this map changed and how the scores differ between the seasons, you can go look that up, and I might have a link to the old video in the description as well. So anyway, this map did pretty well. It got 81 out of 100, and this is actually lower than the score that it got in the previous season. And that's because this season we've changed our grading criteria and we've actually made it a bit more strict. So for those of you who want to have your map reviewed again, just know it probably will get an overall lower score unless you did improve it quite a bit. So anyway guys, let's jump into some of the strengths of this map, and then we'll jump into some of the weaknesses, and we'll talk about how this map still can be improved. So one of the main areas of this map that was actually very good overall was the item spawns that were included. One of those main types of item spawn groups that we always look for is food and clothing and healing gear, and this map did provide quite a lot and a good amount of all of those. Especially the healing gear, it was a bit more specialized to certain areas. For example, running through a normal suburban area, you wouldn't necessarily find that many, but as soon as you visit a pharmacy or a hospital, you would be able to stock back up and get a good amount and a bit of extra for later if you still need it. In terms of the clothing, you could find quite a few of the normal common clothing items, but there were a lot of more valuable clothing items interspersed with the spawns as well. So you could occasionally find a good backpack that you would be looking for. And lastly, in terms of the food, there was definitely enough food to support maybe 2 to 4 people. It was of course a large map, and so especially on a server setting, you would be able to continually run around to each location and gather enough to survive. Another one of the types of item spawns that there definitely was enough of was vehicle maintenance gear. Throughout all of the locations, we were able to consistently find quite a good amount of vehicle maintenance gear for all types of vehicles, so good inclusion of that, and that is of course especially important because this is a large map and travel is very important throughout those sizes of maps. In terms of weaponry, there was of course a good amount of melee weapons, but especially there was a good amount of ranged weapons and really ammo as well. This came in the form of civilian and ranger and military weapons, and really if you hit up any of the main military spots, you could be guaranteed coming out with at least 1 or 2 guns and probably 1 or 2 ammo crates as well, so that you can refill those guns when they do run out of ammo. The last thing that was just overall good about the item spawns in general had to have been the inclusion of crafting items as well as some of the higher tier crafting items. For example, there was definitely enough like metal scrap, cloth, rope, nails, those sort of things just laying around to where you can craft some of those basic survival items, but there was also included some higher tier ones like generators and bricks and chemicals, things like that, to where you can use those to really add on to your base and get to some of those higher tier levels of survival. So besides some of the item spawns, this map also did a very good job in terms of the natural resources, including berries, animals, and metal nodes. Now I will say some of the berries you do have to get from an NPC vendor. This is kind of dangerous because he does provide every single type of berry, and you want to be careful as to how many of certain types of berry you provide the players. Now in terms of a vendor, that does equal unlimited of that type. You do have to pay for them with experience, but experience is pretty easy to get in terms of just killing a lot of zombies and doing quests. So you do want to be very careful in terms of how many of the berries you provide, especially for vermilion, teal, mauve, jade, and indigo berries, which don't provide any negative effects to the player, and so if they're grown in mass, they can really break the mechanics of survival and can make it way too easy for players to survive. In terms of the detailing around this map, I would say it's better than average. It was a little bit inconsistent in some areas, but I'll touch on that when we get to the weaknesses side, because there were some major problems with it. Nothing that really took away from the score too much, but it definitely impacted it. Another thing in this map that was very nice, but not a lot of maps have problems with, was the detail added to the zombies and their drop tables. Now it may seem somewhat insignificant, but there was definitely a lot of good work put into what the zombies are wearing based on where they spawn and what items they drop, and it's really important to consider this as a map maker because it adds that next level of detail. It makes a lot more sense to the players when they kill a fireman zombie and it drops items related to being a fireman, just that sort of thing. It helps with the immersion and it really adds a little bit of extra quality to the map. So very good job with what you did throughout your own map. It was very good and we definitely noticed it. One last thing that was included in the map, and I kind of mentioned it before, was the inclusion of custom content, mostly in the forms of custom notes and NPCs. It was really great to see NPCs included in the map. I was a little bit disappointed as to how few they were, but it makes sense. NPCs are very hard to code and they take a lot of time, so it was great to see there was one NPC location, and that included both both quests, dialogues, and vendors. So especially the vendors were very good for late game economies, especially when you get farther into a survival, and it really could be very interesting to have, especially in a server setting, to where you could have player interactions as well as interactions between the NPCs using the vendors. So good inclusion of the custom content. I really hope that a lot of you other map makers do consider adding it. It really does add a next level of story and interaction to your map. One last thing to consider about this map is it is in fact a large map, and I really appreciated the amount and good spread of locations throughout the entire thing. As you guys will notice, this map is pretty much mostly filled with locations, and they are spread out nice and evenly so that there's no areas where there's large gaps of landscape, which are generally a bit more boring for survivors. A lot of survivors don't like traveling through the landscape. So anyway guys, let's move on to some of the weaknesses of this map. Even though it did very well, there's still a lot of things that could be worked on and could be improved. Now, one of the few and main survival mechanics that this map actually lost points on was the lack of vehicles overall. Now, I don't think I saw any sort of air or water vehicles, and because this is a large map, there is definitely plenty of airspace to where a plane or a jet or even a hot air balloon, something fun like that, would still be very valuable because there's plenty of space to fly it. Whereas on a small map, there's really not that much room, and it's not worth having an air vehicle. But in every large map you make, definitely include some sort of air vehicle unless there's some specific reason that you wouldn't include it. One of the other areas that I mentioned before that it lost some points off on was the detailing. Now, it was better than average overall, but it was definitely shabby in some places. There was lots of copy and paste in some of the apartments, and some of the open areas in the larger buildings were pretty much just empty. There was definitely a lot of rooms that I saw that had maybe 1 or 2 items in it, like overall, and you could definitely tell that not much work was spent there, and it really kind of broke the immersion because certain areas of the map were very well detailed. It was very compact and condensed and realistic even, and then you hit those areas where you find a house and overall maybe it's got 10 objects in it, which is really not enough to make it realistic and seem like somebody actually lived there. So definitely more work can be done, but that really applies to every map. Every map can probably have more detailing work done to it. So one of the other areas of the map that doesn't directly relate to surviving but definitely relates to how the map looks and feels and even plays was the landscape. Now, the landscape overall was not interesting pretty much at all. There was a lack of variety in terms of the materials used and the resources placed on that. There was one type of tree. I think there's maybe 1, maybe 2 types of bushes, and the trees and bushes weren't used very well either. If you look from an overtop view, they were placed evenly throughout the entire map, almost like they were baked on, but almost too perfect. They almost looked like they were placed manually at even distances from each other. Because of the overall lack of variety, it made the landscape very boring, and as this is a large map, there is a decent amount of traveling from location to location. Now, the distances between the locations are not necessarily inappropriate for this type of map, but because of the lack of vehicles, it actually makes the locations feel way too long, and they're super boring because the landscape is not interesting at all either. Now, I do have to mention there were some really good areas of the map. There were some rock formations and some mining caves, and those were very nice, but it would have been great to see a lot more of those because overall they were swallowed up in the vast expanse of like an empty landscape map. So definitely include a lot more of those. The ones you did have were very good, and I really appreciated them, but definitely you need more to keep the map interesting, especially if you're trying to live off the land and not raiding so much. One last thing relating to landscape that's kind of on a separate topic is that no secondary ground outside the map was included. Now, this is something that I don't normally see. A lot of maps usually take care of this, but I just happened to walk to the edge of the map and realize, hey, there's nothing out there. And it's really important to add this to all maps, adding the secondary ground that is essentially just the background of the map. It really helps it blend into the rest of the environment. This was not included on this map, and it really broke the immersion, especially when you get to the edge of the map and you realize, hey, there's nothing out there. So definitely include the secondary ground. It's not that hard. It might take a little bit of work blending it into the rest of the existing ground, but really work on that, add that in. It'll improve the map a lot. Now, the one last smaller issue that I had to mention has to do with the Easter eggs. Now, you guys will notice it got a 3 out of 5 in terms of Easter egg points, and there was a good amount of Easter egg locations included in the map. Now, I will say the Easter egg locations were not worth finding for one main reason, because there were not valuable item spawns included. Whenever you guys make Easter egg locations, it's a great idea, and it really does improve the quality of the map. It makes it a lot more fun to explore and a lot more rewarding when you do find those valuable areas. The only thing that really makes them valuable is them looking good and having good resources in them. So it's very important to include both of those aspects into your Easter eggs, especially if it is like a unique location that the player is supposed to find. Include some sort of valuable item spawns for them, something unique like berry locations, or even something more valuable like military or ranger weapon spawns. That would be a super good thing to include in any type of Easter egg. So definitely consider making your Easter eggs a bit more valuable. It would have gotten you those 2 extra points on your Easter egg bonus points, and that's something of course for every map maker to consider. How valuable do I make my Easter eggs? You don't want them to be so valuable to where a player can visit them and become overpowered in a server setting, but you definitely want them to be worth visiting. So that's pretty much it for the strengths and weaknesses of this map. If you guys are interested in checking it out, there will of course be a link to it in the description below, and if you are interested in seeing the very first map review that we did on this map, there will of course be a link to that in the description as well. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see some more. I will see you all later.